Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to get started in about 2 minutes. So just give us a minute here while we let folks in the room. Really excited to welcome 82 registrants to this webinar, which is pretty exciting. This is a very important topic. So we're going to get started in just about a minute. We already have 30 people in, and we're letting a couple more in right now. So just give us a second here. Really want to thank all of you folks for joining us. This is the National League of Cities. We are 101 years old, which is something we're really proud of. We were founded in Lawrence, Kansas to be the local voice in Washington, and we still do that. We are federal advocates, we are educators, we are conveners, and we're doing all the things, and we're really proud of that work. Something that I get to do, my name is John D'Angelo. I'm a strategic partnerships manager at the National League of Cities, is to engage with different private sector associations and nonprofits to find excellent stories that make a difference for people across the country and in your communities. So we've got a nice diverse group joining us today of mayors, council members, city managers, some housing specialists, and I think there's going to be a little bit of something for everyone in this webinar. So just to kick us off, once again, my name's John D'Angelo. This is the National League of Cities. If you're a municipality and you're not sure if you're a member of the National League of Cities, please feel free to reach out to me at any point. We'd love to talk. But today we've got a really wonderful session pulled together. We're going to be talking about creative revivals, transforming vacant spaces into vibrant places. So we've got two diverse perspectives, one from the nonprofit sector and one from the developer space to join us, as well as a dear colleague of mine from the National League of Cities who will provide the resources that NLC has developed around these issues. Where I wanted to start the conversation today is you may have seen the National League of Cities State of the Cities report. This is our premier flagship report. It's come out every year for the past 40 years, gauging what is on mayors' minds, on council members' minds. Not surprising, number one on the list is economic development. It's been number one on the list for a few years now. And I think what is most telling, though, is that between last year's report and this year's report, that doubled. So we went from 32% mentioning it as their number one to 60+% mentioning it as their number one issue. Mayors are very, and council members are very concerned about economic development in their own communities, and it's something that they actually have a lot of control over and can help. So, one way we can think about economic development, think about how we reimagine our communities is looking at our vacant spaces and what we can do with them. So, with that, I'm going to go ahead and start moving us into our agenda and intros. We've got a solid 35 people, 40 people in the room now. So, I think that is appropriate. We're doing introductions now. I'll give you a webinar overview. We've got a nice video from Zero Empty Spaces that we'll show, and then the panel discussion. Of course, if anyone has questions as we're moving along, please feel free to drop those in the Q&A. We'll be happy to get to those. There's also a chat function, so if it's more convenient, please feel free. Of course, this is being recorded, as I noted, for posterity and for your friends who couldn't make it today. Please share the good word. And I will go ahead and kick it to our introductions here. So, John D'Angelo, Program Manager of Strategic Partnerships at NLC. We've got my dear friend Stephanie on the Housing and Community Development team, who's going to talk to us about NLC's resources on this issue. We're welcoming Mr. Brian Chase, who's the owner and founder of Landmark Property Services, Inc. He's also the treasurer at the National Apartment Association. NAA is the partner that brings this to us today as a co-host with the National League of Cities. National Apartment Association has been an excellent, excellent partner to NLC over the past few years while I've been in the organization. And it's just such a pleasure. They are on the ground doing the real work, trying to be creative, working with elected officials, working with partners in the organizations. In the municipalities to make a difference. Our last speaker, of course, is going to be Mr. Evan Snow, who is a co-founder of Zero Empty Spaces, a really exciting organization that we'll dive into throughout this webinar. So I talked a little bit about the National Apartment Association, longtime partner of NLC's. They're currently an executive partner as well as a supporter of NLC's Housing Supply Accelerator, which we'll talk about a little bit more later in the call. But Mr. Chase, Brian, if I may, tell me a little bit about your role at NAA and how you came to today's webinar with us.
Thank you. Yeah, I serve currently on the executive committee. As you said, I'm the treasurer this year. It's kind of a 5-year process where we work our way up to be chair of the NAA. I've served on the board of directors for a number of years, as well as on several other committees, and was speaking with April and some other individuals at NAA. They knew I had done some basically vacant office building and vacant warehouse conversion to apartments. So they were asking me questions and how it went, and I, obviously told them the good and the bad, and they asked if I could participate in this. So we've done with our company, we've done three warehouse to apartment conversions, and we just recently converted a 12-story office building that was basically 90% vacant to an apartment conversion, and that completed in 2023.
Well, that's really great to hear that you have real use examples that we'll be sharing throughout the call. Is there anything you'd like to share about Marshall Broad here on this page? I'm assuming this is some of the examples of the work that we're looking at.
Correct. Marshall Broad was a warehouse that was in a little bit of a depressed area, and it's starting to revitalize now. It's kind of become a artist market. It's close to downtown, close to MCV, VCU, and so we were able to convert that in 2 phases into apartments with also some retail space that is along Broad Street, which is kind of the main corridor in Richmond. And it's been very successful for us. And then the Mutual on Main, which is kind of the top building you'll see in those photos, was the recent office conversion we did, which was it's a beautiful building. It was built in the early 1900s. It was actually the first high rise in Richmond. A developer had purchased it some time ago in hopes of making it a hotel, and but kind of by the time he had cleared all of his tenants out for the most part, COVID hit, and he obviously kind of rethought about making it a hotel. So we bought it in 2020 and converted it into 170 apartments with some retail space on the first floor. And so they're both great examples of buildings that were vacant, really not producing any real estate tax, no tenants were in there, and we were able to convert them into something that's viable, and they're both in great locations, although they used to be obviously different uses. The locations were excellent. So that's one of the things that we really like about converting vacant buildings into apartments and retail on the bottom level usually, is that they tend to be in a lot of great locations that have already been kind of vetted out and have a lot of, utilities are there, the internet's there, the people are working around it. So they've all been really good projects, and we're looking at 2 more currently in the Richmond area as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you for your work in this area. I think we'll dive a little bit more into the nuts and bolts a little later during the panel discussion, but it's so evident that there is a real opportunity here for the private sector to think creatively about where we're building and how we're building. And so I appreciate you bringing that perspective. On the flip side of the coin, I want to give our panelists, Mr. Snow, Evan, if I may, a chance here to introduce what I think is an incredible organization. I have the privilege of meeting Evan a couple years back now, and we've just always stayed in touch, like looking for the moment that we were going to work together. And we found it through this webinar. So I'm really excited to have Zero Empty Spaces here to talk a little bit about what brought you to today's webinar and what excites you most about the work you're doing. And then we'll get to some of the nuts and bolts in the panel discussion.
Certainly. Appreciate it, John. I appreciate the work that you and NLC do. Uh, for those of you that are not familiar, my name is Evan Snow, and I'm a very passionate arts advocate, community builder, and placemaker based in Broward County, Fort Lauderdale, South Florida area. And art had a profound impact on my life, discovering an area in South Florida in Midtown Miami called Wynwood, where developers went to basically vacant warehouses where artists were painting. They started patronizing and supporting those artists, collecting them, and then they found value in this derelict industrial warehouse district area that's now become the mecca for art, arguably in North America, arguably in the world, the street art capital of North America. And we never had anything like that in my community of Broward County and Fort Lauderdale, just about 45 minutes up the road. So I was working as an arts advocate initially with my business partner, Mr. Andrew Martineau, to start creating platforms to highlight and showcase these artists that we built relationships with, know, and love. And we also have another very successful platform in Miami called Art Basel, the largest art fair in the world. It's $1 billion economic driver for 1 week of art. It is the Super Bowl of art and actually has a larger economic impact than the Super Bowl. So we never had anything like that in our community. We wanted to create something initially to give our artists a platform to be highlighted, showcased, discovered, and ideally collected. But we didn't want to do what everybody else did, doing an art fair inside a tent convention center or hotel. So we initially started doing an art fair inside of vacant mansions that were for sale, that were on the water, the Los Olas Intercoastal Waterways, the Venice of the Americas, that we made only accessible via boat, which was a different way to view and interact with art. It was the largest glorified open house showcase with mansions ranging from 5 million to 25 million and above. And throughout that experience, our local real estate board had brokers, property managers, and developers saying, hey, could you do art in our commercial space? Thankfully, my business partner was a former marketing executive for the Westfield Corporation and consults with various shopping centers, wrote the book and guidebook on vacancy management and different ways to activate vacant spaces aside from putting up the black mass barricade tapes. And we put our thinking caps on, came up with this idea and initiative to activate vacant commercial real estate spaces to create affordable working artist studios so artists have space to create and collaborate affordably outside their homes while providing valuable in-kind vacancy management resources to property owners, developers, and the alike. And from our first space on our main street in downtown Fort Lauderdale, that Los Olas Boulevard, we've since gone on to open 33 of these over the last 6 years across 4 states, welcoming over 800 artists to the program, changing hundreds of artists' lives thousands of times over. And what I'm very excited about now, while we primarily work directly with property owners and developers who provide the spaces to us significantly discounted for us to do the activation and the work and make them available, we're receiving a lot of inquiries from cities, from downtowns, from bids, community redevelopment agencies, and the alike. So we're now preparing different alternatives, different options, different pilots for activating these vacant spaces, including many cities and downtowns want retail incubators. We've kind of perfected a model of taking large spaces, making them into smaller micro spaces. So instead of giving one space to an artist or a retailer, we're now working on these co-retailing hubs for emerging brands and makers to have opportunities, and working on some other creative uses with commissary kitchens and ghost kitchens and former restaurant spaces, mixology academies for nightlife and hospitality training, and eventually getting into live work, affordable live work housing for artists through our 501c3 Spaces of Possibility. So some of what I'm excited about and glad to be here and joining you guys to share today.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I want to just pause here at this graphic that you shared with us. If the 40 attendees on here with us were to take, one thing out of this sheet and take it back to their mayor or their fellow council members or their city planners, what do you think is the most exciting stat out of all this great information?
Probably the economic impact. Closed doors don't generate anything positive. The positive press also has a significant value to it as well, because you can't pay a PR firm or a publication to write about your closed spaces, vacant spaces. But by activating these spaces and giving artists opportunities to get discovered, showcase, and sell their artwork, we have legitimately created real, tangible economic impact and opportunities. Where then, as some of you might be aware from the NEA, National Endowment of the Arts, every $1 that's spent within the arts has a 9-to-1 impact into the creative economy. Whereas these artists are now able to continue paying their rent, their taxes, their gas, their groceries, keep going to the art supply store. So while that number is actually modest at over 1.4 million in economic impact, the actual impact to the greater creative economy is easily over $10 million just from activating these vacant spaces, us serving as one point of contact for the owners and developers, one point of contact for the artists, and essentially letting the magic happen. And that's also not including nonprofit collaborations that we have had some really good success stories with by bringing in nonprofits to host events within the space. So I think the real world tangible economic impact is something that any mayor, stakeholder, or anybody listening could obviously see the benefit from.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we have a video here from Zero Empty Spaces to highlight some of their work. It's a brief 1-minute video, so I'll play that. And I just wanted to say that you've grown Zero Empty Spaces so much in such a short amount of time, and it's really impressive to see the different applications available now compared to just a year ago. So really excited to keep the good news coming out of ZES and America Cities. So let's go ahead and hit play on this, and then we'll keep going.
Appreciate that. This is a grand opening recap from a Simon Mall location that we're in. And this is not a major metro market or city. This is Jensen Beach, Florida, in Martin County, which is above Palm Beach and below Orlando. This is the only mall in the county, and they had a little bit of a vacant wing. Shoppers and don't really want to go to those vacant wings of the mall or the strip or the street level retail, whatever the case may be. So this is just showing some examples of from a grand opening reception, having the space fully active. They're not all going to be on Main Street, and we're also activating in office spaces as well. But we've changed a lot of artists' lives in this location specifically that we highlight on our podcast series and some of the press stories, but just showing some visuals here of the spaces activated.
Looks like a lot of fun, and I look forward to getting to go to one of these in the near future, as I have asked a few times now. So, looking forward to it when we find one, hopefully here in Washington, D.C. in the near future. So now we're gonna jump into our panel discussion a bit. Of course, if there are questions as we go through, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. We've got a few objectives today. We want to talk about how we can convert creatively vacant spaces. We want to foster public-private partnerships that help foster all of that. We're going to encourage inclusive redevelopment that reflects the community's identity, which I think we've done very well. And then we're going to strengthen that connection between housing and creative placemaking. And then, of course, economic development is really what's framing this discussion. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute so we can just have a nice conversation between me, Brian, and Evan here on this issue. And then in about 15 minutes or so, we'll switch over to Stephanie, who will provide the NLC background to some of this work that we're up to. So gentlemen, I just want to start. Like, what is in your work and what you do? What is the real scope of this challenge and this opportunity with vacant spaces?
Brian,
As I mentioned, I mean, the opportunities are that there are buildings that are in great locations that have, all the infrastructure there. So you don't have to worry about working with a locality or a group on tap fees and bringing in a electricity or bringing in water, sewer, and those type of things. So it's kind of a built-in project. A lot of times there's parking that's been built into it with the office component, so you don't really have to worry about that. And generally, obviously, the buildings we've targeted have all been really good locations. They just happen to be for another use at that time. But the challenges, and I think why a lot of we're not really a developer. I mean, we're kind of a niche developer where we'll do these basically vacant buildings with historic tax credits. But in talking to some of the bigger developers in Richmond, I mean, a lot of them don't like it as much because there are a lot of unknowns and it can be much more time consuming than what they want to do, which is go find a piece of land, develop it. They know once they've raised the money and they have the plans in place and they've kind of got a cookie cutter, they can, rinse and repeat and do it really quickly and efficiently and not a lot of problems versus when you get into these buildings, there's a lot of issues that you run into. And you can like the high rise building we did. I mean, we met with, all the engineers, the environmental people, the city, the architect, the construction company. We had a full scan done of the building, and we still had a lot of, major cost overruns in developing that. So there are a lot of challenges when it comes to that you just don't know, and you kind of have to have it was ourselves and another partner, we were 50-50, and everyone knew up front that it wasn't a known and we were probably gonna have to fund more money. We ended up funding quite a bit more than we wanted to in overages, but and I think that's another problem. If you're just a developer that's raised a finite amount of money, you don't really have that leeway to just keep adding on to it. So those are, I would say, the biggest challenges that you can get into when you're trying to redevelop a vacant building.
Yeah, the best laid plans of mice and men, you know.
Mhm.
I can only imagine the work that went into, and it was great to hear all of the different arms that you pulled into that initial conversation, understanding that there were still so many unknowns. But can you talk a little bit about before we go to Evan on this talk a little bit about the interplay with the city and the elected officials? Like what role did they have in the conversation? And how were they either helpful or how could they have been more helpful?
Yeah, I mean, it's, for the most part, they were excited because this particular building is kind of a historic landmark in Richmond. So I think people were glad that it was something was going to be done with and it wasn't just going to be an albatross kind of sitting in the middle of downtown.
Right.
So I think for the most part, and we also, being the state capital, we're right across the street from the state capital, as well as then City Hall was like 3 blocks away. So we kind of had a lot of people that were interested and happy that we were going to make it housing. We ended up getting our loan through Virginia Housing, which is a housing authority here in Richmond. And part of that is we had to keep 20% of the units at 80% of AMI. So, everyone was happy with that as well. See, it's not a truly affordable community, but it keeps 20% of them for kind of workforce, for nurses, for doctor, I mean, not doctors, but nurses and police officers, fire, administrative type people that work downtown. So that was successful. I mentioned yesterday, I mean, the only thing I guess, working with the city were, just small things, but fire, you get your CO, the building's been completely inspected, everything's been checked off by everybody, and then the fire inspector comes out for their annual inspection 6 months later that you get onto annually, and they have a whole litany list of things that they say are, not correct. And it's like they kind of have our building listed as, since it's basically been gutted, it's a new building, and we're like, well, it's new, but it's a historic building. There's certain limitations we had, and so then you have to get the architect back involved and engineers and pay people, and at the end of the day, sometimes you just you just go ahead and then do what they ask you to do and be done with it because you don't really know, it kind of turns into some finger pointing. Um, and then they had asked us to do, we had to do some boring in the road next to us to find out where the Dominion Power Vault was and a few things like that. And so they had asked us to basically repave the whole section in front of our building, which was fine, and we did that. But I mean, 3 months later, literally the whole road got repaved, like a 10 block section that got repaved. So we had asked the city, and in those instances, if you have a repaving schedule, it'd be nice for us to know that so we don't have to, obviously duplicate efforts. But for the most part, it went really well, and it worked out. But it always has its little glitches here and there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think cities they've got a lot going on, and the fact that you were willing to just like keep those lines of communication open is so important to getting any project done, but especially these behemoth redevelopments that we're proposing here. And so I can only imagine the email chains back and forth, but I really appreciate that you did go into the with a mindset of a partnership. Evan, you work a lot with partnerships all the time. It's a keystone of your system. So when you when you put on your economic development hat and you look around, what's the scope of the problem? How is ZES plugging in? And of course, feel free to respond to anything Brian said as well.
Sure. So there's vacant space everywhere. Pre-COVID, there was 100 million square feet of vacant commercial real estate in this country, and we could only venture to say that that's increased. So we like to look at and hope we can inspire and encourage others, people attending today, people we cross paths with, to change the way that they view and interact with empty space. As Brian mentioned, it doesn't do anybody any good. It doesn't help the tax base. It doesn't help the community. So throughout the scope that we've initially carved out, we work, as I mentioned, directly with developers to serve as one point of contact. We don't generally require funding. We don't require TI from the developer to do this. We'll take a large space, we'll subdivide them out and build it out with a modular divider wall system into smaller spaces, so artists can affordably rent 100 square feet for maybe $300 a month with the water, electric, tax, insurance, and everything included. And we've just found immense amount of benefits from various perspectives. It helps with the leasing outlook and leasing activities for the properties. We have gone in as it relates to like the projects that Brian works on. We've gone in with developers proactively with placemaking as the first tenant. Once the ground floor retail space is completed and they've infilled around us, it makes it a little bit easier for prospective tenants to want to be in a space where they're not necessarily the first tenant driving all of the traffic. We also find that it helps attract and retain shoppers in the retail components a little bit more. When they're going out for dinner, they're going to the nail salon, they're going to the coffee shop. It does help retain them so that they can ideally have a larger economic impact into the development or into the project. But beyond that, I mean, Brian talked about going into vacant spaces where there's issues beyond that I'm sure some of us are aware of, but were beyond our wildest expectations. By putting us in these vacant spaces where we do take out HVAC preventative maintenance contracts and keep the spaces up and running, we're able to help mitigate a lot of maintenance issues before they generally spiral out of control. Also plumbing, a lot of things. So those are just some of the benefits. And just to piggyback off a couple other things that Brian mentioned, we're helping developers oftentimes with either the new market tax credits or opportunity zone funds or some of the other tax credits. They generally have to check certain boxes of having cultural components, community components. And we found oftentimes developers and property managers are paying organizations to do that work so that they can maintain the credit. Obviously, the credit outweighs the cost that they pay that nonprofit organization or whatever it may be. So by bringing us in and not having to pay us, by giving us a space for $0 month-to-month lease until they get a permanent tenant, when it's not doing anybody any good, not generating anything positive, and literally only costing them money, we've been able to help developers, increase their bottom line. Also, we're taking the utilities off their P&L. We found recently in California and other places, the property owners are subject to excess insurance premiums on their vacant spaces because they're subject to increased maintenance and vandalism. So while we are not a paying tenant by doing this vacancy management, creative placemaking activation, we're helping owners and developers save money on their bottom line, keeping the space maintained, helping them attract additional tenants. And even in the case of redevelopment, there's a goodwill component. A lot of times you asked about how do things fare with the commissioners. Where I live, the commissioners are getting asked all the time, hey, can't you require, encourage the developer to have a community component in this new development project? And that's not always exactly their prerogative. But by bringing us in, especially when oftentimes developers are telling us they're not even factoring in this ground floor retail into their pro forma because they're obviously focused on the residential up top, it allows them to get the goodwill, check the boxes, mitigate gentrification, and really help just create a win-win-win opportunity that oftentimes you necessarily couldn't even pay for, that we don't require the funding from the owner or the developer to make these success stories happen.
Yeah, mitigating gentrification we had a question in the chat come in. How are we supporting Black and Brown communities, other historically underserved communities, and so I think that your approach to just being community driven is so important as we talk about bringing benefits to the community. So we've talked a little bit about the scope of the problem, how we're engaging with the problem, the opportunity in some ways, a challenge. So Brian, tell me about what's the uptake rate on these buildings? Are they open already? Are folks excited? Are they moving in, or are we still a little away from that?
Yeah, no, the warehouse that we did in phases we finished the last phase in December of 23. Yeah, that's fully leased. It wasn't that big. I mean, it was around 50 units. And then the 170 unit building, it was actually, the demand was unbelievable. So, I mean, we leased the building and it was close to about 6 months. I mean,
Wow.
the demand was just unbelievable. So, I mean, that's been great. It was a lot more expensive than we anticipated. So we're getting into a point where, you're starting to kind of get to a point where hopefully we'll have a return soon. But I mean, it hasn't really produced, a cash flow, but there's always things after the build that you have to do and you get caught back up. But I mean, no, it's been very well accepted. Like I said, it was a beautiful building and a great location if you're working downtown. A lot of people were worried that we were banks and various people that were going downtown, and during COVID it had elevators when we bought it because we bought it in 2020, and it's been very well accepted. And I think once everybody kind of got back to normal, and if you're working downtown, it's such a great location that it's been wonderful, and it's close to the MCV dental school and the medical school, so we get grad students. CoStar is opening up a large research headquarter in Richmond, so they're bringing in like 5,000 employees. So we're getting that. You get a little bit of everything from being downtown. Obviously, government workers with the state. So it's been great as far as that's concerned.
Well, that's really good to hear, and I think maybe Stephanie can talk about this in a few minutes here, but that is something that we're seeing across the country is that demand just gets scooped up in these enviable locations, Austin, Dallas. There's good examples there as well. Evan, tell me, some success stories. These artists getting on their feet, things like that. Um, could you talk a little bit about that perhaps? Like what success looks like for you, your organization, and also the artists that's like working in the space?
Sure. I mean, and I do have some success stories on the property side as well. But on the artist side, I mean, we truly have changed hundreds of artists' lives thousands of times over. We don't take any commission from what they sell. So whatever they generate, they keep. We've helped artists get collected by museums by being able to help invite museum director or curator to their studio in a shopping center in a retail location instead of in their home. It certainly helps with like the validation. It certainly helps with the community component. I happen to be a big fan of Richmond, and Richmond happens to have one of the best art programs at VCU. And so many artists tell us, it feels like they're back in college having this cooperative space where everybody's doing their part to, invite the public, bring in new nonprofits. We've helped a lot of artists be able to pursue their passion of being a full-time artist, or, and quitting their second job, because we keep the barrier to entry low for artists at average $300 a month rent for a studio space in a co-op environment. So it allows them to focus more on their creativity. They don't have to really focus so much on, making work to sell, because the rent is so high that they have to kind of, do things that they might not necessarily want to do creatively. And then we've just seen incredible, success stories of like grandmas and grandpas that have been painting at home 30, 40, 50 years in the second, third, fourth bedroom, garage, wherever it may be, that never stepped out of their house with the art, found out about us in a press story, social media. We're very inclusive. We pair emerging, mid-career, and established artists together. And oftentimes, dozens of times at their first event, artists come crying to us and saying, thank you. I never called myself an artist. I never stepped out of my house with my art. I just sold $3,000 of artwork at my first event, which could have happened in their house. It could have happened someplace else, but oftentimes it doesn't. On the property side, the first spaces we went into were vacant 3 and 5+ years respectively. Those spaces both got leased within 3 months by, in both instances, a gentleman coming in off of the street saying, I like the buzz and energy in the space. Can I get the landlord's number? We're not brokers. We don't take a commission. So in that instance, it was $89 a square foot on our main street in downtown Fort Lauderdale. That's a real world tangible economic impact for spaces that were not getting leased. This was pre-COVID. We've also helped establish a wellness in the workplace program within the office spaces that we're in and some of the retail spaces, where our artists that teach and offer classes offer them to the neighboring tenants, employees, to help them reduce stress, burnout, increase creativity. This also provides, once again, another great amenity, especially if you're looking at 2 office buildings. Both of them have a cafe and a gym, but this office building has a cafe, gym, and an art space where their employees can be enriched. It helps, once again, from attracting and retaining talent and tenant perspective. So we've seen great success stories there. We're actually working on a white paper to show the impact of art in the corporate space, on how it can, certainly help workers who are all dealing with stress and the challenges of life. And just the gift that keeps on giving, things beyond our wildest imagination, doing nonprofit collaborations with a Palm Beach Symphony who had discarded instruments that couldn't be played anymore, providing them to our artists to embellish them with their artwork style, and then allowing them, thankfully, to be auctioned at the opening season event at our premier performing arts center, the Kravitz in West Palm Beach, where 50% of the proceeds went to the education programs of the symphony, 50% of the proceeds went to the artists. Could that have happened without an empty space? Sure. But by activating the space and having the platform and having the artists connect and invite the general public in, attract nonprofits in, these are now real world, tangible, once again, economic impact opportunities that created countless press stories, TV, newspaper, magazine. And we talked about the economic impact of zero empty spaces with the sales, but literally the earned press value of what we've been able to generate from doors that were previously closed that you could not write a positive story about. NPR, PBS, South Florida Business Journal, and other business journals, Richmond Business Journal as well. Literally millions of dollars of positive press coverage, naming the property partner favorably. And the last one I would just say, on the property side, in some instances, we had a space in a mall that had pretty much no restaurants, no food court. And by us activating a space and having the local business journal cover it, the owner, developer who was interviewed to ask what their take was on it, was able to call out for free in press coverage, oh yeah, by the way, we're looking for more restaurants and we're glad to support. And, you know, I'm sure they have their leasing activity and their brokers that are working on it, you know, getting new tenants. But what's the cost of that opportunity? It costs them nothing. The space is vacant, not doing anybody any good. So these are just some of the win-win-wins that come once again by activating these spaces to do something good in the community, and we're just excited to continue expanding these to other cities.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for giving success stories on both sides, how developers can win, communities can win, and individuals can win. A couple of questions in the chat here, and then we'll switch over to Stephanie. Please feel free to respond as helpful. The first one is from Jason Jung. He really appreciated the question around gentrification, the mitigation of that. Would either of you be able to expand or share examples of those mitigation strategies? One concern that they hear is around strategies to prevent gentrification post artist tenancy. So once the artist has moved out of the space or the activation has moved out of the space, is there, a skew towards gentrification perhaps? And any other mitigation strategies you've had?
Can we be everything to everyone? No, these are temporary activations. We are working on establishing more permanent activations, and I just actually had a conversation with the developer that is actually giving us permanent dedicated space in a new mixed-use development project where we actually have a few other developers that have already done that, but we are not going to be displacing the artists. And we're through our 501c3, we've established called Spaces a Possibility. We're working to have properties now donated to us permanently, to have permanent art spaces. I'm sure everybody knows in our community some space that's been vacant 5, 10, 20 years. The kid inherited it from the parents, and they don't want to maintain it. They don't want to pay property taxes on it anymore. So by receiving these properties via donation for a tax-deductible donation receipt, we can put the owner's name on the building and make it a dedicated permanent art space, not deal with the gentrification there. Unfortunately, in our current model, we do temporarily activate them until they get a permanent tenant. But there is always going to be empty space. So we do work to move artists to the next available space, and we do keep the rates low and consistent. And that's something we've been able to do. And on the proactive side, we found that there are developers that know, unfortunately, they are displacing people via these new development projects that are now bringing us in as that first tenant, once again, on their ground floor retail or on their new mixed-use development site to bring those people, artists, the creative class, whatever they may be, back into the community. Sure, that's not going to be the case every time on every development project, but we certainly encourage more developers to think about that, especially as we keep hearing that they're just not, everybody's not factoring in the ground floor retail into their pro forma. So let's do something good with it and hopefully help mitigate the G word as much as we can.
Yeah, I mean, from us, it's we are going to purchase a building. It's typically a vacant building in a neighborhood, and it doesn't come along with gentrification because it's so niche and small that it's one very small piece of an already established neighborhood. And as a matter of fact, in the landmark at Marshall Broad, I mean, we had a lot of people. It's a very diverse neighborhood who were actually very thankful. They were like, we grew up in this neighborhood. We never thought there would be, luxury apartments built in this neighborhood. And people were, actually, the community kind of really rallied around it and wasn't viewed as a gentrification thing. Obviously, that's not our goal, nor do we can't obviously skew one way or the other who comes in to lease the apartments. But I think when you're talking about vacant buildings being turned into something useful, it's such a little niche thing that it's not like where you see development. I know where they developers go and the next thing you know they've developed 20 blocks of something and it turns into a different neighborhood. But kind of what we're doing with vacant buildings a little bit different in my opinion.
One small caveat, John, by putting artists in malls and office buildings versus the traditional industrial warehouse district where the real estate is cheap, that it's easier to redevelop, not everybody's knocking down every mall to redevelop and gentrify neighborhoods. So we have multiple spaces now running 3 and 5 years plus respectively, and potentially for the indefinite future. So a lot of people traditionally think the artists go to the area where the rent is generally the cheapest, and that is the case in a lot of places. But we put artists in these retail environments and office environments that are not all in a rush to be redeveloped.
Yeah, I appreciate a lot of what you said, both of you said. Just being, taking that scalpel approach, Brian, into this like, one solution amongst a big toolbox that developers and similar industries have. I really appreciated that discussion. Evan, one more question for you, I think, before we head over to Stephanie. So get ready, Stephanie, I'm coming to you. Is there typically flexible zoning or licensing in these cities that facilitate or encourage pop-ups? Yeah, have you encountered that at all?
I will tell you, Richmond was one of the most difficult to deal with, but we got through it. We have a space in Richmond in Stony Point Fashion Park. Generally, we don't. So we do go for business tax receipt. We do go for a certificate of occupancy. We do operate as a regular tenant. We do pay our fees and get inspections and all that. 9 times out of probably 98 times out of 100, it does not require a change of use. Really only in the big cities of Chicago, where I guess they're a little bit more notorious for their permitting. They did make us go through a little bit of an arduous process to do a special exemption. A lot of cities now, as I'm sure you've covered and I know is a hot topic, are accelerating express permitting protocols, especially for pop-ups and temporary use activations. I know a lot of the bigger cities, San Francisco and New York City, have been doing this quite well. But we go through the process. We do try to ask up front what the permitting process is so we can plan our build out and our timeline accordingly, and communicate that transparently with the stakeholders, with the artists, with the community, so everybody knows, what the time frame is once we announce it. But thankfully, I would just say there is a wave of improving the permitting process going through municipalities, mostly on the large side, but even on the medium and the small side. And if your municipality is not, and they're historically known to be, some are months, if not over years, I would certainly encourage you to Google and look up. I'm sure NLC is putting out some of these new permitting updates that are making it easier. Seattle just announced one as well. So there's definitely hope on the way to improve these processes. And we're glad to comply within the permitting process wherever we go and activate and contribute to the local municipality through our business tax receipt, inspection fees, and all the things.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that overview. I'm going to pass this over to my colleague Stephanie to talk about some of NLC's resources in this space. So please forgive me as I share my screen. And then Stephanie, feel free to start when you're ready, and I will run us through the slides.
Thank you, John. Thank you. My name is Stephanie Unaja. I am a program manager for housing and community development at the National League of Cities. I'm going to talk a little bit about what cities can do to activate vacant and underutilized spaces, but looking more into it from the housing perspective, as housing is a central part of economic development in every community, as well as a huge part of what makes a workforce stable and able to stay in their community. And as many cities across this country are dealing with the issues of affordability as well as availability of housing units, vacant properties can provide an opportunity for cities to increase their housing supply and to do that in an attainable way with affordability in mind. So I'll talk about two NLC resources. The very first one is the Housing Supply Accelerator Playbook. This came out of the campaign, the Housing Supply Accelerator, which is a partnership between NLC and the American Planning Association. And this particular playbook is is a resource designed to help cities looking to increase their housing supply, to how to tackle these challenges and to create diverse, equitable, and attainable housing options. And so out of this playbook, we do touch on how cities can use vacant properties, and I'll just talk through a few of the takeaways of the ways that we encourage cities to begin that process. So one of the first ways to do that is first find out what is available to you. So we encourage cities to take an inventory of their land resources that are underutilized, brownfields, and other opportunities that might present themselves to create housing. Secondly, would just be to make strategic decisions about what to do with this land. So thinking about how it can serve long-term community needs. We also encourage cities that are looking to increase their housing supply to start to do so first with infill development. So by using this vacant opportunities, as some of our speakers mentioned earlier, some of these sites already have access to infrastructure, which really would minimize a lot of the costs up front, as well as increase connectivity within neighborhoods and reduce the potential sprawl of building outwards instead of kind of like utilizing the main resources that you have within your community. In addition to that, vacant properties can also help lower development costs. Land really is one of the most expensive parts of when putting housing developments together. So if there's an opportunity for cities to donate their land resources as well as offer them at reduced price points, this really helps to lower development costs, which can create this affordable opportunities for housing. And lastly, for cities that may not have a lot of land resources, but are still looking for ways that they can unlock vacant lands for housing supply, consider collaborating with landholders such as universities, faith-based organizations, and hospitals, because they often do have lands that are underutilized and also have a like-minded interest in the community and assets that are valuable to the community. The next slide, please. And I just want to highlight one more resource, and this is our guide for local governments for community land trusts. And it offers an introduction of how cities can support land trusts and the benefits of them. And just as I'll just provide a short definition of what it is, but community land trust is a structure that allows land to be held in trust for community needs and kind of is outside of the influence of market pressures. So the land in the community land trust can be used for housing, but it can also be used for other resources such as community facilities, community gardens. So there are many ways that the land in those land trusts can be used. And next slide, please. And this resource talks about ways that cities can support this effort. So one of the ways that cities can help would be to convene stakeholders, bringing together residents, the nonprofits, and local institutions to grow a CLT model or to explore it if they haven't explored it at all. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, in terms of creating this inventory of the lands and this allows for a project and land pipeline for community land trusts that are looking to create permanent affordable housing and or all the other resources that I mentioned earlier. And another way that cities can help is to create a land bank or to partner with a land bank, again, which would provide this permanent pipeline for the development of community resources that create long-term affordability, but also create vibrant communities that we all want. And that's all that I have today. And I can drop the links in the chat of these resources for your reference.
Well, thank you so much, Stephanie, for that overview of two critical resources that the National League of Cities has put together for elected officials, planners, folks interested in housing, etc. Really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us. And as she noted, there will be um, there was a question. Yes, the slide deck will be sent around afterwards, as well as a recording of the webinar for folks who had to join late. If you have any questions about the Housing Supply Accelerator or any of its materials, please feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to connect folks that are interested in learning more to the team here at NLC. And of course, to our other two panelists, Evan and Brian, I really appreciate what you've been able to add to this conversation as well. So in the last 5 minutes here, aspirational thinking, what's the future of activating vacant lots? What can city leaders do to be helpful? And so let's have Brian. Brian, why don't you go first? What's the future of activating vacant lots? What from all of your learnings?
Oh, what can city leaders do to help facilitate it?
That too, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always going to come at it from an incentive-based, uh, prerogative. Is particularly if we're talking about vacant buildings, not necessarily vacant land, but
Oh yeah,
building
vacant buildings. Thank you.
is more, because you need all the incentives you can get to make sure you're when you get into the development of it, all the unknowns that the better the incentive. I know there's, the city of Richmond and some of the surrounding counties have recently developed like housing funds. They typically go towards a new development, but I mean, if they could be applied towards redevelopment of buildings would be good. Something, and a developer could certainly keep 20-40% of the property at 80% of the AMI or whatever the numbers work. I mean, you might be able to take it down to 60% of the AMI if you're getting more funds from a fund. It's all how the numbers work and how the banks look at it and how we would look at it. And obviously, real estate tax abatements for a period of time certainly help to kind of phase in the development years and helps with making that a little bit better incentive for investors to do that as well. And just having an open line of communication and what their expectations are for, vacant buildings and how they would like to see things developed. And in some cases, maybe not having a particularly mandated zone for retail space, because in some buildings there is, if you're not on certain busy corridors, then the retail space really bogs down the deal. And I know that you're kind of in a zone in the city, and they're like, well, you have to have X amount of retail space, but in certain streets and locations, it just doesn't work. And some it works great. You might be able to have more, but so those would be, I guess, kind of my thoughts off the top of
Yeah,
my head.
those are super helpful takeaways. I think, the open line of communication, being a partner, approaching things with a creative mindset, and building creativity is something, Evan, you're really good at. So what's the future of activating vacant spaces and how can city leaders help?
Well, we'd love to get into the affordable live work housing component. So should your municipality have a former motel or low rise 2-story housing complex that was maybe outdated by some standards? Those spaces and other similar type of spaces could work for affordable live work housing for artists. They don't need the highest and best furnishings. And through our nonprofit Spaces of Possibility, we can, work to activate them. When I was just at Placemaking Week Europe, and we're talking about, how oftentimes developers are quick to want to, redevelop a building in Europe. They're thinking about the carbon emissions and sustainability and the climate saying, why can't you just preserve that building? And so we're glad to help there. And then as cities, want to spur an economic impact and economic activity in their downtown corridors and their RAC corridors, or business improvement districts, wherever it may be, we're certainly glad to help facilitate those retail incubators and other type of accelerator type of opportunities that will lead to full-time permanent tenants by giving an aspiring and emerging creative brand or maker an opportunity to test the market. So should you, have a downtown improvement district or a downtown development authority or a business improvement district, don't hesitate to reach out and connect us. We're glad to have the conversation. We've developed a vacancy advisory solution that we can work with cities large, medium, and small. We're assisting multiple cities on preparing for the World Cup. So there's a lot of different solutions, and we're really excited though to just continue changing the way people view and interact with empty spaces, finding new creative win-win-win solutions, and eventually establishing these permanent spaces. So if you have, chronically vacant 5, 10, 20-year vacant spaces in your municipality, and, the property owner is not doing anything with it, feel free to reach out. We'd be glad to have the conversation to see how we could turn that into a space of possibility and, make more positive impact in the community. And certainly, once again, appreciate the time, the inclusion, and the opportunity, and glad to continue supporting NLC and NAA on these efforts.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I just appreciate the wealth of information that my three panelists brought today. I really hope you folks took something away from this. Evan, the national perspective on ZES, and then Brian, that like hyper local Richmond example, I think really paints a picture. And then Stephanie, all of the work that NLC is doing that underpins and supports all of this economic development and housing development is critical that we maintain the team mindset and keep going. So with that, please join me in a virtual round of applause for our panelists. I really appreciate the work, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Cheers.